Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So as requested, I have placed the Umayyad Dynasty on these two slides. We'll start with this one. So as we can see, Muawiyah, the son of Yazid, the son of Muawiyah, the son of Abu Sufyan, the son of Harb, the son of Umayyah, the son of Abd al-Shams, the son of Abd Manaf. And Abd Manaf had another son who was, who? Abd al-Muttalib. I remember I mentioned that last night. Why is everyone looking as if this is the first time you're hearing this information? Allah al-Musta'an. I'm having that same problem in the morning with my other students. With the students at the school and also the students who come to my home. They look at me, I said, you remember when we were discussing the hadith of Jibreel? that look, you know, subhanallah, like, and it was just a week ago that we had discussed that hadith. Tayyib, inshallah, let us begin. So, this is the Sufyani branch. Alright, so now we know the Sufyani branch. Let's move on to the Marwani branch. That will be the next one. And this is it basically. These names in yellow, this is the Umayyad Dynasty in Al-Andalus. So as you can see, Abdurrahman, the son of Muawiyah, the son of Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik. So the grandson of Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, he escaped the Abbasid forces, made his way to Al-Andalus, and there the people pledged allegiance to him as the Khalifa. So he was able to unite the Muslims of Al-Andalus under the rule of the Umayyads. That lasted for about 140 or 30 years, more or less. And after that, the Al-Andalus basically split up into, dozens of smaller states. Alright, so let's go through some of these names that we discussed. There was a lot of Yazids and Muawiyahs and Walids. So let's just put things in perspective. Marwan comes to power. He has a son, Abdul Malik. We said last night that there were 4 of the Khalifas that were strong. Who were they? Alright, there was Muawiyah. Walid and Hisham. Alright, so these were the 4. So 2 of them were the sons of Abdul Malik himself, and also Muawiyah. And how many of them were there altogether in the Umayyad dynasty? 14. Alright, so alhamdulillah, that puts things into perspective. I hope you took a picture that you can refer to again, inshaAllah ta'ala. Alright, and here we can see what was on the previous slide. And we know that he only ruled for about 6 months. In fact, he did not want to be Khalifa. And he then said that I leave the matter to you. And they chose Marwan. And that began the Marwani branch. Alright, so let's go to what we want to talk about tonight, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So I told you that the Abbasid call to their rule started in the time of Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik. And it grew and it grew and it grew. Its major general was a man called Abu Muslim al-Khurasani. And Abu Muslim al-Khurasani was only this responsibility. And he was given the leadership of the military forces of the Abbasids. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about some other issues, inshallah. These are some of the things. Sorry, we need to go back. Seems I'm unable to do that. Here we go. So this is the Umayyad Masjid in Damascus. If anyone has ever been there. Has anyone ever been to Damascus? No. So this was built during the time of Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik. A lot of money was spent on building this masjid. It was also one of the main centers of Islamic learning. And until recently, until the civil war, it remained a place of learning in the Muslim world. Right, so this is where students would go. This is where you would go in Damascus if you wanted to study, privately with different ulama, Quran, Arabic, different Quranic studies, and besides the other universities and colleges that are available in Damascus. Damascus was, from the very outset, from the time of the Sahaba, was a major center of Islamic learning. Right? That would include also Makkah and Medina, and then later Kufa, Basra, and then Baghdad, as we'll talk about later, inshallah. This is an example of a coin that was minted in the time of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. As you can see, the Islamic imagery or writing is very prominent. Before this, there were pictures of Persian or Roman emperors on these coins, but this is now where everything is Arabicized. Is that the proper name? That's the proper word. All right, just checking. So everything is Arabicized now in his time, and it is also with a lot of Arabic, not Arabic, but Islamic messages on the coins themselves. All right, so let's move on. This is Al-Andalus. This is what the Muslims controlled. Those northern cities over here, they were always going to be there. The Muslims never really subdued these northern kingdoms. They, from time to time, would fight against one another, and the Muslims would assist one of these kingdoms against the other. But after a while, these people were able to consolidate their power and push the Muslims down further south. This year is the last of the Muslim states in Al-Andalus. Alright? Granada or Gharnata in Arabic. Alright. This is basically just a brief overview, because it was not my intention when we announced these lectures that we were going to discuss Al-Andalus. But just today I downloaded some literature and some audio books, etc., that I want to use to prepare for maybe a future lesson. There's a lot to cover, alhamdulillah, in that period. So Tariq ibn Ziyad, he's from the Amazigh. That is the proper name for the Berber tribes. They call themselves Amazigh. Even today in Morocco, the Amazigh are asking that their language be recognized in the Moroccan parliament. All right. So they say that Arabic has been too dominant for too long. So they are trying to reassert themselves. One of my close friends is on his mother's side, is Arab, and on his father's side, he's Amazighi. Amazigh. It's even written like that in the English. Amazigh. So like the Tuareg tribes, like in North Africa and in Mauritania and Mali, they are also Amazigh. So this entire northern African area, that was basically Amazigh tribes. They had different names and so on, but they fall under one big name, like the Arabs today. The Arab League has more than 20 countries in that league. Why? Because Arabic is the dominant language spoken in all of those countries. Anyway, so he was from them, and he was given the task of leading the first Muslim force over the Straits of Gibraltar. That's why Gibraltar is the Latinized version of Jabal Tariq, because that's where he established the first beachhead, and then from there the Muslim forces were able to conquer most of Spain. So we can divide this era into a few. The first of them is the governors, right? These are the governors of which dynasty? Look at the dates. Yeah, the Umayyad, right? So mostly the Umayyad, so they are governors of the Umayyad dynasty. This area here, that's an area where one does not know who's in charge. Why? Because this is when the Abbasids come to power, and because Iraq and Iran is so far from Spain, right? Even today, if you took a flight from Baghdad to Madrid, how long would it take? A flight? 4 or 5 hours? That's a long time, right? And that's in modern times. Can you imagine how long it took for information to pass between these two areas? That's why there was a lot of sort of independence movements in North Africa and in Spain, because central government, like perhaps let's use Malaysia as an example. Like Sabah and Sarawak are quite far from Putrajaya. Yes? Can you imagine how difficult it would have been for the Malaysian government to keep in daily contact with governors and chief ministers and etc. if they had to rely on people actually physically traveling from Sabah and Sarawak, once a week or once a month? It would take days, weeks perhaps, before information crossed. And because this distance is even further, it made it more difficult. So this period over here is one that one does not really know if who's in charge. This period over here is the Umayyad period. After that period, we have the Ta'ifa kings. So this is we have about 26. Some ulama say there were even more of those different independent states. Sometimes those states were no bigger than Kota Damansara. Let's be honest. Sometimes they were just a city, like PJ. That's a state. And then right next to PJ, what else do you have? Shah Alam. That's a state. And these two states are fighting one another, and sometimes they'll ask another state, like let's say Puchong, just bear with me. Puchong is a Christian state, and so one of these Shah Alam will ask Puchong, to go to war with them against PJ. This is what was happening. So this is so when we ask what led to the downfall of the Muslims in Al-Andalus, one of the reasons for that is the dunya that everyone was trying to get a piece of. Like I'm not concerned about the affairs of the Muslims as an ummah. I'm only concerned about myself and my immediate benefit. Then we have North African control. Basically, this is when a number of North African empires, like the Muwahhidun, you can write this down. You can just do research on this later. There's the Muwahhidun, and then there's the Murabitun. And all of these groups are called upon by these Ta'ifa kings to come and help them against their internal Muslim rivals and also against the Christians. Okay? So this is when a lot of people, Amazigh specifically, they come from North Africa, from Mauritania and from Morocco and Algeria and other places, and they cross over into Al-Andalus and they help the Muslims, but then they say, wow, Spain is really nice. We should stay. And then they stay. And they stay for a long time. Right? But finally, the Kingdom of Granada, this was a gift. So, may Allah reward the brother. The Kingdom of Granada is the last one to fall. It basically lost until 1492. And this is when, as we said last night, Ferdinand and Isabella, they conquer the city, and this is the end of Muslim rule. And tomorrow night, inshallah, we'll talk about how the Ottomans basically sent ships to Ghamnata to pick up refugees from there and take them into the Ottoman-controlled areas like North Africa and also to Istanbul. Right? Also, a lot of Jews are also brought by the Ottomans from here, because the Catholics now, as they take over the city, they basically say you have three choices. One is death, the other is that you leave, or the third one is you convert to Christianity. Right? So these are your choices. And so of course, many people left and they went to North Africa. Have you heard of the famous historian Ibn Khaldun? Alright? So his family was very prominent in Al-Andalus, but they were forced to leave later. Alright? So, all of these things are happening, but alhamdulillah, we can move on inshallah ta'ala. Just a few facts, and then we'll move on. What we want to talk about tonight is the Abbasid Caliphate. And this is its greatest extent. All the way from Spain into what basically, at the time they take over the Umayyad Dynasty, they basically control everything that Umayyads controlled, right? Makes sense. But as we will see, Al-Andalus is going to be lost to them in a few decades. North Africa is also going to break off into independent states. And one of the defining features of the Abbasid Khilafah is that more and more people assert their own authority. So even though they recognize the Khalifa as the Sultan and the Khalifa, they don't believe that he has any authority in their political and financial affairs. It's very similar to what happened before the fall of the Ottoman Empire. That, like, for instance, let's go back in history here in Malaysia. The sultans of the Malayan Peninsula and in Indonesia and the Philippines and also even in India, like the Mughals, they recognize that the Khalifa, but just as a religious recognition. Do you understand? Did they believe that the Ottoman Khalifa had the authority to tell them what they can and cannot do in their own lands? Never. This is the reality. The Sultan here in Malaysia, he might want to appeal to the Khalifa for assistance, but he does not believe that the Khalifa has the authority to tell him what to do. And one of the biggest indications of that is that here in Malaysia and other places where there were local Muslim rulers, the khutbah was read in whose name? The local ruler, not in the name of the Ottoman Sultan in Istanbul. So this is something to think about. We move on, inshallah ta'ala. We're going to divide, and I'm not going to do what I did last night. I'm not going to give you lots of names. I'm just going to divide these 508 years or 506 years, depending on how you want to look at it, into 4 main eras. So there's the founding in 132 after the Hijrah. There's the time of Turkic or Turkish dominance. Then there's the Persian dominance of the Shia. And then lastly, the Seljuks. And we're going to pay a lot of attention to that last one because it's going to directly impact our discussion tomorrow night. Alright, if any of you have watched the Irtugul or Ertugrul series, how many of you have watched that? Ya salam, you have a lot of time on your hands. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. I'm just astonished. Seriously. Because it's not like it's like a normal series on TV or like with 10 episodes, every season. How many episodes are there? 70, 60, 600 episodes. And how long is an episode? Even if it's 100, it's a lot. And if everyone is 40 to 50, 1 hour, subhanallah. I'm just thinking how many hours of reading that could be. How many books could you finish in the time? Allahu A'lam. Anyway, so you will know that if you have watched that series, you would have known that they speak about the Seljuks of Rum. So we'll talk about that later, inshallah. Alright, so let's begin. This era is the era of powerful and independent rulers. Okay, so I'll show you a family tree after the slide. But for now, all I want you to know is that this is 100 years. We have 9 Khalifas. And they are either brothers of one another or sons of the Khalifa. Alright, so the Khalifa, the first Khalifa is As-Saffah, and then his brother comes to power after him, and after that his son, and so on. And then another brother comes to power much later, and that's basically what's happening. They make the same mistake that the Umayyads made, which is that before they die, they appoint 2 successors. And obviously that leads to the inevitable civil war and rivalry that we saw last night. Alright, anyway. So there were 9 Khalifas. And Baghdad is built during this time, the time of the second Khalifa, Al-Mansur. And he is the one that commissions the building. It takes 4 years to complete it. It starts in the year 145. And it is finished in the year 149. Okay, so this is when Baghdad is built. It is a city that never existed before. So before the year 145, there was no Baghdad. And then they built it. Alright, so you need to keep that in mind. It's not like Damascus. Damascus is a very ancient city and so on. But Baghdad was purpose-built, and I'll show you a picture of it a little bit later. This era, this first 100 years of the Abbasid Caliphate or Khilafah, this is considered to be the Golden Age. And I have a question for you. Who decides what's a Golden Age and what's not a Golden Age? What's the Golden Age of Malaysia? What era? Tun Mahathir's first...
Yet to come.
Oh, it's yet to come. That's depressing. Inna lillahi. Right? But who decides? You can only decide this in hindsight. Right? People only look back. They look back at a time. They become nostalgic. Oh wow, 100 years ago we were so amazing. Or before the British colonized Malaysia, mashallah, we did amazing things. And then, you can only do this looking back. But if you were to give some what's the word I'm looking for? What's the opposite of subjective? Objective, yes. If you were to give some objective reasons for why this is considered to be the Golden Age, then I'll give you a list. Let's start. Number 1. The absolute independence of every Khalifa. He is not beholden to any faction. He is not beholden to any outside influences. He is independent. His decisions are the ones that are implemented for the most part. There are going to be certain exceptions, but for the most part, all 9 of these Khalifas have absolute power. Right, that's 1. Number 2, this is an era in which there is stability. Again, for the most part, there will obviously be exceptions, but there's stability, there's prosperity, okay? The third reason is that this is an era of education, of progress in terms of knowledge. I'm sure you've heard of Bayt al-Hikma. No? The House of Wisdom. The translation movement. None of this sounds familiar. That doesn't. Allah musta'an. Really? Anyway, don't worry. Inshallah, it'll be it's my job to fill in the gaps. As one historian, I was watching a podcast the other day, and he's an Ottoman historian from Britain, a Muslim brother, and he said that he was doing his masters in history, and then he realized that he's like Swiss cheese. His brain, when it comes to Islamic history, is like Swiss cheese, meaning it's full of holes. And that's someone who's doing his masters in Islamic history, or history in general. So can you imagine what the ordinary Muslim knows about Islamic history? So it's fine, inshallah. First things first, if there's a problem, you need to recognize that there's a problem. Okay? So we first need to take stock of that. Now that we know there's a problem, we can then take steps to deal with the problem. Right? And I would suggest that one of the ways to do this is to read as much as possible. We are not readers, this ummah of ours. That is one of our biggest problems. We don't read, and if we read, we're reading all the wrong stuff. So on Saturday I was teaching the teenagers, and then I asked them, so how many of you read? A few hands went up, and then I asked, what do you read? And mostly novels. Right? Mostly novels. Now, I'm not saying that novels should not be read, but there's obviously a priority, right? Giving priority to what is most important. Anyway, what was I saying? We're still talking about the Golden Age. Yes? Alright, so education and the flourishing of Islamic knowledge. Okay, so this is that era where books are being translated, books are being written. There's a strong focus on intellectual, pursuits. People are being sponsored by the government. Ulama are able to work full time, as scholars, especially since Bayt al-Hikma is established in the year 215 after the Hijrah. Okay, 215. This is when Al-Ma'mun establishes Bayt al-Hikma. I'll show you a picture, although it's just an artist's rendition of what it must have looked like. All right, just think about one of the biggest libraries. What's the biggest library in the world, or one of the biggest? Library of Congress. Library of Congress in America, right? Massive library. But just think of that, and think about the amount of money that needs to be spent on making sure that is one of the best stocked libraries in the world, and providing the facilities and all of the materials that scholars will need. So this is what the Abbasids are doing during this particular time. Alright, we move on inshallah to another issue that is also one of the highlights of this era. Have you heard of Harun al-Rashid? Yes. Alright, so he's one of these 9 Caliphs. And he's legend, obviously. There's a lot of myth there, right? Because of 1001, or the Arabian Nights. Right, so Harun al-Rashid is at the center of that particular story. But most of that is fantasy. Right? The genie and all of those kinds of things. So most of that is fantasy. But you can see how powerful that imagery of the Abbasids at this time is around the world. That people have all of these ideas about what it must have been like at that time. Now, Al-Ma'mun is the son of Harun al-Rashid. And he is the one that starts the fitna of the creation of the Quran. What is that fitna? Who can tell me? The fitna of the creation of the Quran. No one knows. Is that Ma'mun, he was raised and he was tutored by Mu'tazili scholars. Okay, so his father, like many sultans and khalifas before him, wanted his son to get a very good education, right? Especially when they're very young. So he got these scholars to come and teach him, but one of them was a Mu'tazili scholar. What is a Mu'tazili scholar? So many things to unpack now. No, but seriously, we must discuss it, because we need to understand this is this issue is still being discussed today. This issue is still something that's controversial. It's still, people are still discussing it and talking about it and writing about it. So it's not like Yes, it happened a long time ago, but it still impacts things today. So who are the Mu'tazila? Okay, so in short, the word i'tizal means to separate. I'tizal means to isolate. So isolationist is perhaps one translation. I'm sure there are many others. To separate and isolate. So they separated themselves from the halaqah of Hasan al-Basri. Right? Hasan al-Basri, that famous tabi'i, they had a dispute with him regarding a person who dies while guilty of committing a major sin, and that person did not make tawbah. What is that person's status in the year after? So the Mu'tazila said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish him. And Hasan al-Basri was saying that no, that matter is up to the mercy of Allah. If Allah wishes to forgive him, Allah will forgive him. And if Allah wishes to punish him, Allah will punish him. They said no, Allah must punish him. And then later that view became more nuanced, where they basically said he's in a state between two states. Al-manzila bayn al-manzilatayn. So in the dunya, we consider him to be a believer, so we will wash his body, shroud him, pray upon him and bury him. But in the akhirah, he's a kafir, and Allah will punish him forever. You understand? Because their view of iman, like the Khawarij, is very similar. It's one entity. If part of it goes, the entirety of your iman also leaves. Right? And obviously sinning is one of the reasons why your iman might leave you. This is their understanding. Later, they developed a system of thinking. As one of you said, they gave preference to the intellect over revelation, where the aql was given preference over wahi. So if there is a contradiction between what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed and what the aql concludes, then we must give preference to the aql over revelation. And this issue of the Quran is one of those issues. Because they say, I really, when I sat this afternoon and I was thinking about this issue, I thought, how deep should we go? So, without going too deep, I'll just say the following. This issue is basically, the Quran is the speech of Allah, yes or no? Yes. We know that Allah is eternal. So are His attributes also eternal? Yes. Is the Quran one of His attributes? You see, that hesitation there, that is the issue at hand. Because if you say that the Quran, if you say that the Quran is one of Allah's attributes, it's the speech of Allah, then it means that it is eternal. It was always there. But so they found evidence in the Quran that seems to indicate that it's not. Because the Quran seems to, there's like speech has a beginning and it has an end, right? I just spoke a sentence. It started and it ended. So from those logical, rational perspectives, they said no, there's no way we can say that the Quran is kalamullah, but rather it is something which Allah has created. You understand? I'm simplifying it. I do have a reference, a two-part lecture that I'd like you to watch, inshaAllah ta'ala, when you have time for more information. But I want you to understand that the Mu'tazila, they have a few principles. One of them is the principle of giving preference to the intellect over revelation. So coming back to our issue, in the year just before he died, in the year 218 after the Hijrah, Al-Ma'mun, the son of Harun al-Rashid, he implemented a mihna. And a mihna here is an inquisition. Basically, he wrote to the governors that they need to test the ulama on this issue of whether or not the Quran is created or it is the speech of Allah. And if they say it is the speech of Allah, then they need to be persecuted. And he allowed the torture, the imprisonment, and even the execution of any ulama who did not toe the official line on this issue. Because as Imam al-Tabari rahimahullah, he has the whole letter in his history, and basically it says that as the Khalifa, it is my responsibility to ensure that the Muslims have the correct aqidah. Right? That's like Putrajaya deciding, right, through its different state organs, that this is what Muslims must believe. And then making sure that Muslims are tested on this belief, specifically the ulama. And if you don't agree with that belief, then you are liable to these different punishments. Do you understand? Like it could even, it's still happening today. Like in Saudi Arabia, it's definitely active. It's definitely active. You don't toe that official line. If you hold a different view, you are going to be subject to, reprisal or whatever. There's going to be negative consequences there. Time. So this is all that's happening during this time. Let's just have a look at this family tree. Okay, so let us begin, insha'Allah ta'ala. Let's start here. So what you have is Abu al-Abbas, and his title is As-Saffah. Alright? Abu al-Abbas, his title is As-Saffah. I want you to write that down because he is the first of the rulers of the Abbasid Dynasty. Alright? Look at his lineage. His father is Muhammad, the son of Ali, the son of Abdullah, the famous Abdullah ibn Abbas. Right? So Abu al-Abbas As-Saffah, he is the great-grandson of Abdullah ibn Abbas, the famous Mufassir of the Quran, from amongst the companions. Right? So the Abbasid dynasty takes its name from the Prophet's uncle. Everyone with me? Alright, khair. So what happens after he dies? Before he dies, he appoints his brother Al-Mansur as his successor. So his brother becomes the next ruler. After him is Al-Mahdi. By the way, all of these are titles. I do not want to confuse you by giving you all of the names, because there's a lot of Muhammads, a lot of Alis, and a lot of Abbas. Okay, it's worse than what we were discussing last night. And what makes it even worse is that there are 37 of them between the period that we want to discuss. And if we decide to talk about the Abbasid Khilafah in Cairo, we're going to add another 17 to make it 54. So, mashallah, we leave it, we keep it simple, inshallah. We keep it simple. Alright, so he comes to power. It's during his time that Baghdad is built. Okay, during the time of Al-Mansur. Then after him, his son Al-Mahdi comes to power. He has two sons. One is Al-Hadi, the other one is Harun al-Rashid. Harun al-Rashid has three sons. Now what happens is that Harun al-Rashid, before he dies, he makes these three sons his successors. This one is the first, and after him should be this one, and after him should be this one. Do you understand? So because they are all like of different ages, so when I die, you should become the Khalifa. And when you die, your brother should become the Khalifa. And when your brother dies, your youngest brother should become the Khalifa. Do you understand? Right. Anyway, after Harun al-Rashid dies, Al-Amin al-Ma'mun, they go to war with one another. Why? Why? Because Al-Amin does not want his brother. He wants his son Musa to become the Khalifa. And then when Ma'mun finds out about that, he leads an army. He goes to war with his brother. They fight two battles. His brother's forces are destroyed, and they enter Baghdad, and Al-Amin is killed. Alright? So that's that history. But anyway, after Al-Ma'mun dies, his brother Al-Mu'tasim comes to power. Alright, then we have these two over here. So Al-Ma'mun, Al-Mu'tasim, and Al-Mutawakkil. These three Khalifas are responsible for the inquisition of the creation of the Quran. Alright? And it is during the time of Al-Mutawakkil when Imam Ahmad, you know the famous story of how Imam Ahmad was tortured? Now that happens during the time of Al-Mutawakkil. It is only during the time of Al-Wathiq. No, sorry, I made a really big mistake now. I apologize. These three. It is Al-Mutawakkil that brings this issue to a close. Right? This issue of persecuting the ulama if they don't believe in the creation of the Quran. This is when it comes to an end. And so that's the first era of the Abbasid dynasty. Everyone with me so far? Have I lost anyone yet? I've lost all of you. Okay. So this is the city of Baghdad. The city of Baghdad was initially viewed as being a round city. Okay? The palace of the Sultan and the Khalifa was in the middle, and next to it was the masjid. And then around that would be the houses of the military and the government. And around that would be the residents and everyone else. And then the city would be surrounded by massive walls. You understand? So this is lots of architects. Are there any architects here? Because I used to believe that architecture is just about building plans. But architects, according to one of my students who's studying architecture in Kajang, he says that architecture is about designing living spaces. So I didn't know that before. So this is one of example where Al-Mansur, he wanted this living space. And as you can see, it's close to the Tigris River. This is the river Tigris flowing here. And to the west will be the Euphrates River. But so it's close to a water source, and it is perfectly chosen, and it's purposefully built. You understand? And obviously over the centuries, the city is going to become it is today. Walhamdulillah. Alright, so that's Baghdad. This is an artist impression of the Bayt al-Hikma. There are many pictures online, but none of them are really accurate, because the city, this Bayt al-Hikma and everything in it was destroyed when the Mongols conquered the city in 1258 or 656 after the Hijrah. Right, so we don't know what it looks like. So anyone's attempts now, these are all going to be artist impressions of what it must have looked like. Lots of scholars, lots of books, lots of parchment, copious amounts of ink and paper. That's all that was available there. Walhamdulillah. Okay, so Bayt al-Hikma. This is the lecture that I would like you to watch. The story of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal by Sheikh Al-Mu'tasim Al-Hamidi. Right? It's a two-part lecture. So I hope inshallah ta'ala you'll find the time to have a watch. And it's one of the better lectures available online. There are others, but I thought that this would be the most informative. And because the Sheikh's articulate, alhamdulillah, and very knowledgeable about the topic. Alright, so that's the first era. Let's move on now, inshallah ta'ala, to the second era. And this is the period between 232 and 334. In this time we have 13 Khalifas. How many? 13 Khalifas. Again, I will not bore you with the names, but let's talk about a few issues. If you remember, I told you that Al-Amin, Al-Ma'mun, they fought a civil war. Yes? During that time, Al-Ma'mun calls upon the assistance of Turkish cavalry units to assist him in his war against his brother. And this is the first time that the Turks will enter into the service of the Khalifa. Okay? And then over the next few decades, they will assert their control over the Khalifa. Out of those 13 Khalifas, 2 or 3 abdicate, 2 are killed, and a number of them are imprisoned. And that's the story of this period. You have absolute domination of the military and administration by the Turks. They decide who's the Khalifa. If they don't like the Khalifa, they either imprison him, they force him to abdicate, or they kill him. Right, so they have complete control over this time. But between the period between 256 and 295, you have the Khalifas reasserting themselves. In Arabic we call this Sahwatul Khilafa, or the awakening of the Caliphate. That would be an English translation. This is when the Khalifa now starts to reassert his control, but it's short-lived, and again they are able to reassert their power at this time. The next period that we're going to talk about, nothing of significance really happens during this time, except for something. The greatest thing that happened during this 100 years is what? I'm going to wait until someone says something. Say again? I heard someone say something. There was a... No. Something significant, something that you and I still benefit from today. No, the madhabs came before. Just write this down for me. Abu Hanifa died in the year 150. Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, died in the year 150 after the Hijrah. Imam Malik died in the year 179. Imam Shafi'i, 204. And Imam Ahmad, 241. So three of the four died during the Abbasid period. Yes? But that's not what I want to, I don't want to talk about that. That's just a side note, just so you can put things in historical perspective. Alright? Yes. It's happening. I feel not the madhabs. No. The bid'ahs, most of them have already consolidated themselves into clear, the Khawarij and the Qadariyah and the Mu'tazila. And we still benefit from it today. We still use it as references. We still teach it. We still learn it. The 6 books of Hadith. This era, this 100 years, or this century, basically the 3rd century, this is the golden age of Hadith literature. This is when all the major books of Hadith are compiled. You have the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. You have Sahih al-Bukhari. You have Sahih Muslim. You have Sunan Abu Dawood. All of them lived and died during these 100 years. So Bukhari dies in what year? Okay, I'll just give you two dates. Bukhari dies in 256 and Nasa'i dies in 303. And all the others were 270 something, 272, 275, 279. Everyone got that? Alright, so this is the golden age of Hadith literature. This is when most of the major compilations of Hadith are made. So even though there's a lot of internal political instability, there's a lot of the Khalifas are not independent, they don't have authority, that did not stop the intellectual progress in this particular time, which is a very important thing for us to, just as a side note and a tarbiyah lesson. We find that even now, wallah, I just think this will bring me to tears if I think about it now, but I must say it. The civil war in Syria has caused hundreds of thousands, millions of Syrians to become refugees. Many of them are in refugee camps in Turkey. But a lot of people have been working in those refugee camps, establishing schools and establishing places of learning. So I'm just going to focus on something that I'm familiar with, and that is tahfidh programs. In the last 8 to 9 years since the civil war started, those camps have produced hundreds of huffaz. Never mind in other areas of Islamic learning. But just in terms of Quran memorization, I know of just one organization that I know of, I can speak about. They have produced hundreds of huffaz. They have taught people that, like in those areas, like in the rural areas of Turkey, access to ulama was not something that was readily available. But because so many ulama fled Syria and have found refuge in Turkey, they are now teaching the local Turkish population and the Kurds and others, teaching them those sciences of Islam that they would never have had, real access to. So that doesn't mean that we invite war, that we encourage it, that we think it's a good thing. But there's hikmah in the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Something for us to think about. Right? It's the things that, in fact, here's something from my own life. When I was just starting my studies in 1998 and 1999, there was a Somali sheikh who came to Cape Town as a refugee from the civil war in Somalia. And he was my Quran and my Arabic teacher, the first one I had before I went to Medina. So I would go to him. He used to work as a petrol attendant, like our Bangladeshi brothers here at Shell and Petronas. So he used to work like that. And so I would go to him late at night when there were less cars for him to service. And I would sit there with him and I would read Quran to him. So I'm just thinking that if there wasn't a civil war in Somalia, I would not have had access to that kind of tuition so early in my in my journey to Islamic knowledge. So These are these side benefits that we think about when, especially in hindsight, we can talk about that. Khair inshaAllah ta'ala. So that's the second error. Let's move on. There's a reason why we're moving so quickly, because I want to spend some time talking about the Mongols and the Crusaders. Alright? And then also spend a lot of time on the Seljuks, because those three groups that I just mentioned will have a profound connection to our story tomorrow night. All three of those groups. The Seljuk Turks, the Christian Crusaders, and also the Mongols. Right? They are all directly connected to the Abbasid story and also to the Ottoman story. Alright? So let's move on to our third or our second family tree. Right. So here you have Al-Mutawakkil and Al-Wathiq, and you have their sons. This person over here, Al-Mustakfi, is the last of this era. Okay? Because after this era, you'll have another family coming into prominence. They are Persian in origin, and they are also Shi'i. Okay, so he's the last of them. How many did we say there were?
9.
No, 13. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Right, so from here to there, those will be our 13 khulafa. As you can see, they all. What do these titles mean, by the way? Al-Mutawakkil. What do you think it means?
Representative?
No, Al-Mutawakkil. Because a lot of these names have been shortened. Al-Mutawakkil ala Allah. The one who relies on Allah. Al-Wathiq billah. The one who trusts Allah. Al-Muntasir billah. The one who seeks help from Allah. Al-Mu'taz billah. The one who is given izzah and honor by Allah. Al-Mu'tamid, the one who relies upon Allah, is just a different version of this. Al-Muhtadi, the one who seeks guidance from Allah, and so on and so forth.